All right. Hey, everybody. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Fab, how you doing? Today we have a very special guest.
We do.
André Sauvé, sales engineer in a big telecom in Montreal that we won't name in case whatever.
Protect the innocent, yeah.
Exactly.
Or the guilty.
Exactly. Guilty. Nice. So today we're going to talk about something that I, to be completely honest, know nothing about, which is sales engineering. The only thing I do know about it is that I have a few friends that were in electrical engineering and moved to sales engineering, but I've never asked them what do they actually do. So there we go. I get to learn today. Thanks, Andre, for accepting our invitation.
Sure. It's my pleasure.
So should we maybe start with, Andre, you want to tell us high level what a sales engineer does in a large telecom to bring Fab bring Fab to the dark side?
Right. Well, I don't think it's rocket science, right? I think it's really providing technical leadership from an account perspective to the customer. So in other words, I mean, very simply figuring out what the customer's needs are and if and how our products can meet their needs and how they can integrate with their existing environment. And generally that involves working with other technical folks within the organization who have specific expertise on different parts, components of the product, or different lines of products that will be integrated together. And so I think, especially for larger accounts, usually my role is like I said, just kind of act as actually my title where I am is architect, which is kind of apt because I guess, you interface with the different technical folks within the organization to make sure that, that our solutions meet the customer's expectations. In a nutshell, that would be it. Yeah.
Okay, so if it was, let's say, a really simple product, a sales engineer would be necessary. But because it's a more complex product, you're sort of the guy who makes sure that that the crazy salesperson is selling the right thing to the client, right? So that you're talking to them, you're going in depth, and you're figuring out, I guess, in the telecom way, what their needs are, and you're talking to your own technical people and making sure that they get really the best solution for their needs.
Right. Yep, and that's it. Like I said, we have to take into account all the factors, where the customer, what their current situation is, in terms of technological environment, and also, what their vision, longer term vision is, and where they want to go, and make sure that we provide products that position them well for the future. So.
Okay. Fab, I have a zinger question, but do you have one?
I don't know if it's a zinger, but I was just trying to understand where kind of usually in the sales process do you fit in?
Right. Well, it varies greatly. I would say, like in my business in the telecom, it can go anything from, selling a phone line basically to a complex multi-site network, that uses various underlying transport mechanisms, and with security components and so forth. So it can go from the very simple to the extremely complex. So generally, obviously, the more complex, the earlier on I need to be involved.
Okay.
And it's a really case-by-case basis. I think, as sales, there's never two sales that are the same, right? And never two customers that are the same, never two motivations that are the same. Sometimes an opportunity comes about, where we didn't expect one, just out of a simple conversation. And sometimes it comes in through an RFP, right? So it really varies greatly. But I mean, I guess ideally, I should be involved, or sales engineers should be involved from the get-go, right? To have longer term discussions with the customer, like I said, to see what their current environment is, what their current situation is, obviously how well their business is doing, right? Like, so in the time of COVID, we have lots of customers that had great projects for this year that got sidetracked, right? Because of COVID. So, but still, it's not because there's unpredictables that you shouldn't plan, right? So I think it makes sense for customers to set sort of short-term and longer-term plans, and figure out where they need to take their networks and their applications, their IT applications, to meet their needs, right? So ideally, we should get involved from the get-go.
Sooner than later. Hey, Andre, I want to ask you a question, because obviously Fab and I have done like a bazillion episodes. Well, I'm exaggerating over like probably close to over 50 episodes, and we usually really focus on the sales aspect. So, the introduction, asking the questions, the questioning strategy. So in our world, the sales process, that questioning strategy, to really figure out where the client needs the services. So what you're saying, like, are you involved like right from the get-go? Let's say the sales rep is trying to reach out to a new client, so they're introducing themselves. Like, how soon what is the gauge? What is the temperature gauge for the sales rep to say, oh, I should be bringing in Andre as a sales engineer? Is it according to the questions? Is it when he feels he's out of what he's overwhelmed with the question that's being asked, or is there sort of a strategic way that you guys do it and say, look, you do the introduction, get the first meeting, bring the sales engineer? Or is it get the introduction, do the first 2 meetings, then bring the sales engineer? Is there some kind of structure, or really doesn't?
Yeah, well, again, I think it really varies, right? So I think for larger accounts, the ideal situation is, like I was saying before, where, right from the get-go, you have meetings with the customer. And some of our accounts, we have quarterly meetings, for instance, where we meet with them and talk more high level where their business is going. I think that's an ideal scenario. I think often for small and medium business, it's a bit like you're saying, Paul, where often you'll have the sales rep will basically just look for opportunities, and if he thinks that there's something there, then he'll set up a follow-up call with a sales engineer. So I think that might be a broad way to segment things, right? And I think that's kind of how we see it in the market today, where for small and medium business, you kind of have more of a tendency where the account manager will be autonomous, or the sales representative. I guess it's not necessarily an account manager if it's a very small business, right? But they'll generally be a little bit more autonomous and usually look for things that are a bit more cookie cutter type of solutions, right? Where you don't necessarily even need a sales engineer, or if you need them, it's only really for when comes time to place the order, where there's a few little technicalities that you have to make, to verify. But for larger accounts, I think it makes sense to be involved as earlier on as possible. I think it varies too, like bigger companies have all kinds of stuff, like they have, marketing programs that can be, various initiatives that are sometimes based on a type of product, or sometimes it's based on a practice, for instance. So, like for instance, where I work, we have different product lines. Like for instance, we have like connectivity, we have infrastructure sales, which is basically equipment sales. We have professional services, and also managed services. But then you have practices, right? So for instance, a practice is security. So, and security tends to cut across all of these things, right? So sometimes we'll have marketing initiatives that are based on a product, and then other times they'll be based, for instance, on a practice. And then I guess depending on the complexity of the offering, it might start with just a mail out letter or whatever, or sometimes it's the account managers that contact their customers and look specifically for certain cues. They'll get already, when our marketing folks create the marketing programs, yeah, they'll basically create a little cheat sheet or whatnot, right, to say, this is what differentiates us from our competitors. This is what, why certain customers might be interested. If they have, if they meet XYZ criteria, then they're probably a good fit. So in a case like that, then the account manager might do a preliminary call and try to figure out if there's an opportunity, a level of interest, and then, set up a follow-up call with.
To make it really real to someone who's listening right now, would be sort of like you'd have a special security offering for a special product that'll help a certain type of business. So then the sales rep or the account manager will call the clients that he thinks fit in there. He'll have a preliminary conversation saying, hey, have you thought of this and that? We could help you with a certain, IT security, whatnot, and we could come in and talk to you about it. So that the account manager or the salesperson would do without you, I assume. And then if it gets complex, but is there sort of like Is there sort of like a level where, okay, then I bring in Andre, or does it depend on each salesperson? Like, do some salespeople go a lot further before they bring a sales engineer in, or do they, it's always that's sort of at the same level?
No. I think, like you said, I think it's very personal, right? I think more senior account managers often work. They do a lot of work independently, right? And they only bring in the sales engineer for specific issues, and then other folks, especially more junior account managers, will often, bring a sales engineer along. Yeah, exactly. Just tagging along just in case as a security blanket.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's really all kinds of ways of working it. And I guess where I work currently, what we try to do is pair off sales engineers with account managers so that you learn each other's styles and you learn how to work together, right?
Yeah.
And maximize that. It also facilitates. I think in most businesses are pretty sales driven, right? So I think the account manager really decides on the strategy, and often even in terms of prioritizing work, right? So that's a big advantage of creating teams like that, where let's say I'm working on two different opportunities with the same account manager. Then if he says, well, you really got to do this, well, I can say, well, okay, but that's going to suffer, and that's also your other account, right? So it's easier to manage the prioritization of work that way. So I found that that's a good model. It's not always positive, but ideally, I think that's what works best.
So you said something before, you pair an account manager with an individual. How do you, is there some kind of evaluation that's done before to see if the characters will work together, or is it done more on expertise? Or is it done more on style of business? Or is it sort of, we have these three guys and we'll put them with those three guys?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes. So, or all of the above, right? So I think, I think usually the way it comes about is, we're assigned to certain people, and usually it varies by industry and by size of account, right? So, but generally you'll have like a sales engineer working with anywhere from 2 to maybe 10 account managers, right? Depending on the size and the number of accounts that you have. And I think you learn to work together, and well, like you said, Paul, sometimes there's some incompatibilities, I guess, and like I think most companies try to. That's the job of managers, right? That's the fun part of trying to manage that, make sure that like-minded individuals work together well. So.
And because we're talking about the job itself and the structure of the team, and I realize it's a big question, but what does it take to be a good sales engineer?
Ooh. Yeah, it's a good question.
You can just point to yourself, Andre.
Yeah, that's it.
Check out my LinkedIn profile.
That's the short answer. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think it's like a lot of things. I think listening is a huge thing. We talked a little bit about this before this podcast, and I think one of the reasons I'm here today is I think a lot of account managers have sometimes difficulty working with their sales engineers. And I think it's slightly different priorities, slightly different motivations, slightly different compensation that sometimes don't align perfectly. But I think that well, and maybe if I touch on that more specifically, I think what happens, and maybe this is obvious to most people, but generally, I guess account managers get compensated mostly on commission, whereas sales engineers are generally on a bonus plan, right? Where you basically have a portion of your salary that's bonus based, and that's usually linked not only to the accounts that you're working on, but often to a regional number or even a national number sometimes, right? So because of that, I think sales engineers tend to have kind of a longer term vision, if you will. And so I think sometimes that creates a little bit of friction.
Because I think that model of the way in your companies where sales engineers are tied in more to the global number than the individual sale. I'm not sure that's always the case in smaller companies. I think often in smaller companies that, whoever is doing the sales engineering job will be paid like the salesperson. But you're right that it can really cause a disconnect. And you get that with management too, right? Like you'll often, the vice president level of management of sales is also paid in that same format over the success of the entire company. So what you're saying is it really can cause a discord, because I guess the salesperson saying, let's sell them this because I'll get a bigger commission, to make it very clear. And then you're going, well, that's not what they need. They're going to fail and it's going to be horrible. And he's pulling on the blanket because he's thinking of his commission, and you're going the other way. You're not necessarily thinking of your bonus. You're thinking, well, it's just not the right thing. And we're going to be hurting in the end. So how do you manage that? What do you like? What do you do when you get a salesperson? Like, how do you manage that situation? I mean, I'm sure you're talking about it, so I'm sure it's happened. We like giving us names.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, you try to look at that, well, explain your situation, right? Like, I mean, how you see it. And, it's a question of risk versus reward too, and longer term, what the possible consequences are of maybe positioning something that's not ideal, right? So, I think I see sales engineer role essentially as a trusted advisor, right? I think you'll hear that very often, and I think it really rings true where, to what you were asking earlier, Fabrice, in terms of what makes a good sales engineer, and I was saying it's someone who listens, and you're able to understand the customer's environment and what works well for them. And the idea there is, if obviously if you become a trusted advisor, then it's not just one sale, but it's repeat business, and it's a symbiotic relationship that you build over time, right? And so, I think that obviously every situation is different, but I think that's kind of what I try to position often enough with account managers, is that we need to look at longer term, and hopefully this customer is not going away. Hopefully we're not going away either, and we need to look at things in a longer term perspective, right?
That's good. But there's it's interesting. You say a lot. You say a good sales engineer should listen, should understand the client's need. But to me, as a salesperson, I think a good salesperson should be doing the same thing, right? They should be asking good questions. They should be really finding out how they can help the client, and then they should be selling value, not just a thing. They're selling how it's going to make the business better. But I get the feeling in your business or in your world, it's almost like that is divided. It's almost like the salesperson goes on the, I don't want to say on the attack, but on the discovery, and the sales engineer is the one who really does the questioning and deep dives a lot. So you, in a standard sales process, you're the one doing the strategic questioning to be more consultative, to really find out the business needs of the client. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say, well, more the technical needs. I guess business needs is a little bit more blurry, right? Where I think that it's kind of a shared responsibility, and arguably more on the account manager's side, to figure out where the customer is financially, and what the relationships are within the organization, right? Who has power, who's going to be our champion, for instance, and what the roles are of the different individuals that we're dealing with, right? But certainly, I think from a technical perspective, that's really my job, right? It's really the sales engineer's job to figure that out. So definitely, that's our responsibility, and I think it's kind of a divide and conquer approach, right? Like, it would be kind of senseless if everybody tried to do the same thing. So I think we focus on the technical aspects, and the account managers focus on the business and relationship aspects.
But they really do need to be connected, right?
For sure, yeah.
And of course, it's funny because I was listening to a podcast, I think it was last week, and it was some typical sales podcast, and the guy was complaining about sales engineers. They don't get it, and I'm thinking, and that's what made me think, let's have André here, because I think let's have the sales engineer be able to protect his the honor of what he does, because I've known André a long time. Full disclosure, we've been friends pretty much forever, and So, I'm the typical sales guy, and Andre is probably more the typical sales engineer. We've had a lot of conversations, but I have a lot of respect for what Andre says. And, I've said this to Fab 1,000 times. I think a good salesperson has his customers' well-being at heart. And I know, Andre, and I know you have your customers' well-being at heart. But how come that relationship in a lot of companies, and I'm not asking you to talk about your own company, Andre, but how come from your perspective, how come that relationship seems to sometimes break down? Is it just because of the way they're remunerated? Is it because they have different goals? Like if you give the engineer these objectives and you give the rep those objectives, they just don't meet? Like, in your opinion, what is it, or what are some of the things that you think, and it doesn't have to be related necessarily to yourself, but some of the things that you've seen that break down and create the fact that relationship is harder, and that so many, like, it's almost like a husband and wife in a not good relationship,
Yeah. I don't know. I think, a big part of it is just kind of losing sight of strategy. I think, and I think it's typical of sales too, where, the old show up and throw up, for instance, where, you're so focused on, this is what my product does, ABCD or whatever, right? And you show up at customer sites and you just explain all of, why you're so much better than the competition, and then you forget to listen to the customer, right? And I think that happens a lot, both, for account managers and for sales engineers, right? And potentially more for sales engineers, even more, because you're so focused on the nuts and bolts, right? And so I can see that that's a cause for stress, right? Because the account manager is likely to be more strategic about making a sale, right? Whereas the sales engineer might be stuck on, well, this is what our product does, and this is why it's so much better than another one. I was thinking about that. I went to a home renovation place this weekend, and I wanted to buy some doors, and the guy that I was dealing with basically told me why I shouldn't buy doors with him today, and gave me all this, information as to why he knew so much, because he used to be a carpenter, and all the different things that you should probably take into account. And I left there. First of all, obviously I didn't buy the doors, and secondly, I'm not even sure what the requirements are, for the right door. Like, do I need to know the size of the door or the size of the opening, or what do I need to work from, And so, and I think in a situation like that, the guy just totally lost sight of what his job is, right? Yeah. His job is to help customers buy, basically. And he was just basically telling me how much he knew about carpentry and whatever, right? And I think that happens all the time, right? So, and I think that's a cause of relationship issues between the sales rep and the sales engineer too, because, like I said, sales engineers because they're so focused on the nuts and bolts, tend to forget about that aspect of things. That the point is to make a sale, basically, and make a customer happy, right?
Then that's interesting, because you're right. So if you're too focused on the nuts and bolts, you might also, I think the sales engineer also has to be aware of the objective, right? So let me give you a really basic example. So let's say you're in a large corporation, and all they want is just a patch and a fix for 6 months because they're closing down. Right. So maybe they don't need the Rolls Royce of security systems or telecom systems, because they're shutting down in 6 months. This plant, it's a huge company, and so. But this is why I think you need to understand the customer's goals. Or they're just starting out. They only have 100 employees, but 2 years from now they're probably gonna have 1,000 employees, and they're gonna have they're gonna need much more solid infrastructure. So you need to have that approach too. So it can't just be the nuts and bolts. It's got to be on how it relates to the business, right? You can't really disconnect those. Now, when you ask, I assume you find those kinds of things out, right? Not detail, but you kind of need to know what those things are when you're making suggestions.
Sure. Yeah. And absolutely. I think sales engineers often get excited by the latest whiz bang technology, and and that's what they want to sell and promote. And sometimes it's just not a right fit, at least maybe not for now, right? And so yeah, definitely you have to, like I said, you have to listen. You have to ask questions and listen and understand where the customer is at, what their culture is, right? Like, so for instance, some customers want to do everything.
We love when someone says that and it's not coming from us, we're super happy.
Right. But that's it, and sometimes it's just the company culture, right? So does it, and this is, a huge deal with, corporate culture, right? Some customers do everything in-house and some customers outsource everything, right? So just from the get-go, they'll give you an idea of what their mindset is. Are they looking for, professional services and managed services, or are they just looking for us to sell them the equipment and even they'll do the design themselves, and we'll just sit back and take the order or whatnot, right? So it really depends on the customer's mindset and culture, and I think we have to be sensitive to that.
Okay.
So if I can just hop onto that, and thinking about maybe the younger people in the room, like how do you?
Fab? What are you saying, Fab? Are you saying that Andre and I are old?
No, I'm bucketing myself in there too. No, how do you become a sales engineer? I mean, obviously you have an engineering background. Is that a must? Is it something that you can learn? Like what are there different paths? Is there one path?
No, I think it depends. I think, I mean, more often than not, I think sales engineers go through like a bachelor's and some kind of technical field, either computer science or mechanical engineering or electrical engineering or chemical engineering, I guess, depending on the field that you're in. So I think that's kind of usually, like, the very broad statement, that's usually like a starting point. Mm-hmm. And then after that, maybe not from the get-go, but usually companies look to have some kind of industry certification. So, depending on the industry, there's standards bodies that will implement, certain training programs that you can get certified in. More often than not, they're led by the largest manufacturer in the industry, right? So often, and then you'll have a large widget manufacturer who sells more widgets than anybody else. Well, then all of a sudden their training program becomes the industry standard, right?
Right.
So I think that's usually the path that a sales engineer will take. Some background, sort of general program in like a bachelor's in some engineering field, and then usually more in depth, like industry specific certification.
And Andre, what kind of sorry, just to follow up on that. So that's the background, right, Fab? And I'd like to know, like, do you get any kind of sales training, Andre, when you're a sales engineer at
yeah, it's kind of varies, has varied over the years, I guess. But yeah, I guess, not huge, but I think, maybe if I look back at my career, maybe every couple of years I get some, whatever, 1 or 2 day course or something like that, focused on sales training. That would be kind of I think that's probably about an average for my career, would be something like that.
Really?
And then, I guess we have, obviously we have meetings internally with sales folks to strategize on how we want to approach the market, with different initiatives. So,
and do you think that's because ultimately it's still more of an engineering role than a sales role? Like, why do you think there's so little sales training in a way?
Good question.
Yeah, well, I think, essentially, I think it's really more seen as the account manager's role to manage the sale, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's important for us to have some notions of, sales approach. Mm-hmm. But certainly, I think, like I said, I think usually the account manager is responsible for the overall vision and strategy with the account. So, but yeah, I mean, it helps not to, have your hands in your pockets when you're talking to customers and stuff like that. I guess basic signs of
in the eye.
Yeah, that's it.
Don't mumble.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Andre, I have a question. Do you think that's lacking? Because I mean, I know you've got good sales skills in what I consider to be good sales skills. In other words, you're not a shyster, but you're someone who listens. You just said that you want to figure out what the customer needs. And to me, in a consultative sales, that's one of the most important things. Do you think that's lacking in the sales engineering field, or do you think that just should not be the responsibility, and the sales engineer doesn't need those skills?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I don't. I guess it makes sense to have some training in sales. I think maybe more importantly is just people need to be reminded and maybe be a little bit more strategic, I think, about how they approach customers, and customer meetings. I'm certainly guilty of it, but more often than not, we'll have a meeting with a customer and we don't even take 10 minutes before to strategize on it, right? What are we trying to achieve with this meeting, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's common as dirt, right? So I think it's maybe not so much specific tactics that are important, but I think more just to have some
Sharing
kind of yeah, sure. And also ideally some kind of structure, right, for trying to make that a habit, right, where you have, say, at least monthly account reviews, and maybe certainly for important strategic meetings, I think often it's the case that we'll have an internal call first to discuss it, but maybe that should be a little bit more automatic, even if it's if it's not a huge call. Sometimes it's still worthwhile to have a couple of minute chat to say, what are we trying to do here?
Yeah.
And what do we expect from the customer? What do we think they want out of this, right? And how do we prepare for that? Yeah. I think that's lacking often enough. And I think that's mostly where I see a need, is really trying to be more strategic about how we approach meetings and customers in general.
Interesting.
Nice.
Fab, got a question?
I think you covered it.
All right.
That's complete.
Well, thanks, Andre. Thank you very much. Actually, it's very interesting. I wanted to bring this forward. I've known Andre a long time. I know that he has a really good instinct for sales. I've often tried to convince him to jump over to the sales side. Jumped over to the dark side yet, but obviously obviously I think a sales engineer and a salesperson that work together will probably have a lot better success. And then there's probably some basic things in relationships that that maybe are forgotten with certain people in certain industries. But to me, it's been very helpful, Andre. Thank you very much.
Good.
We're gonna stop the live feed, and then we can continue chatting about the guitars on your wall after.
Sure.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Andre.